Welcome to Reason and Theology, everyone. Your host, Michael, continuing our lecture series here for the St. Maximus the Confessor Institute, continuing the lecture series on the basics of Biblical Hebrew with Louis Dizon. Louis, how are you? Good to have you back on.
Feeling good. I think we took a bit of a hiatus from this
Yeah,
series, but it's good to be back on it.
absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, what
So
I'll do is
I'm
just pass the floor on to you and take the lecture wherever you want to go with it.
sure. Let me just turn on screen share
Yeah.
and I will be ready.
Okay.
So, all right.
There it is.
So, great. So, that we can begin immediately. So, I do not think there is a Hebrew word for eat. And if it is, it's probably just Yod, Yod, Tav. Yeah, we'll go with that. Um, Now, when we last left off, we discussed the definite article among a few other things, and for those of you who have the textbook and the workbook, I told you guys that you should try to do the exercises in the workbook that correspond to each chapter that we cover. So we're going to take a look at the exercises for the definite article, and also we'll be doing some translation work, which is exciting. You guys will get to translate original Hebrew text for the first time. So really quickly, to recap some of the things that we learned regarding definite article, there are some rules about what particular vowels we add to the definite article, and those vowels are indicated in chart 4.2. So here we are. So you got the standard form, which is the he with the patach and then a dagesh on the consonant right after it. And then you have compensatory lengthening, which comes after gutturals. So instead of a patach, you get a kametz and no dagesh. Honorary doubling comes after a he and a chet, and it also has a patach but no dagesh. And then the segol, the he and the segol, which comes after certain letters that have a kametz underneath them. So looking at this, let's take a look at some of the nouns that we have. So you got melech, choshech, anashim, tov, sadeh, chalom, tzon, rosh, esev, mashiach, shalom, hechal, midbar, and kol. So for melech, it's a fairly straightforward he with the patach. So hamelech. So hachoshech, because also the dagesh. So here for the choshech, you also get the he with the patach hachoshech, but because there's a chet, there is no dagesh on it. And then anashim, that's one of the gutturals. So ha'anashim would have a kametz rather than a patach, like this. And then good tov, it would be your standard again, like this. Sadeh, same thing. So this, and then chalom, this is the word for dream, and because it starts with a chet, you have an honorary doubling, so there is no dagesh. Tzon, it's a regular thing with a dagesh as well, like this. Rosh, again, it's your fairly standard one. Esev, so ayin counts as a guttural, so instead of the patach, it should have a kametz underneath. Mashiach, so it's a regular ha-mashiach. And then same with shalom, it's the same there. Hechal, the word for temple, would have compensatory lengthening, so there's no dagesh on it. Midbar, fairly standard, and then kol, also fairly standard. So that is how you put the definite article on each of those words. And then for more advanced practice. So you may recall, as mentioned earlier, some nouns will require a segol underneath the ha. So harim, chacham, har, and afar. So three of these, namely these three, have a he with a segol. So the harim, chacham, and afar. Har, on the other hand, is treated as a regular. Oops, sorry, that shouldn't be a comments. Ignore that. That should be a patach. And the reason for this is because it only counts if the consonant, so the syllable right after it is not the accented one. So remember, in Hebrew, if there is no accent marker, we assume that the last syllable is the accented one. So in this case, har. But so in this case, because this is not the accented syllable, the one before it has a segol. This, on the other hand, it's patach. Hopefully, it will come naturally to you over time. Don't worry too much about it. The key with Hebrew, at least in my experience, is some of these rules are best learned inductively. Like you get exposed to multiple examples of them, and it comes naturally to you without you even thinking about them. So, and then you have the conjunction. So the word for end. So you learn how to attach it to each of these words, and it's going to be slightly different for some of them. So the standard v would be a standard one would be a vav with a shava underneath. So let me just you know what, I don't think this actually makes a difference. Never mind. So we'll just do the first these examples then. Ve emet. So that is your standard vav with a shva. Veish, again, a vav with a shva. Ve chalom, again. And then here you got mukomot, and here instead of a shva, it will be a cholem vav. Sorry, the shurek vav rather. So mukomot, and this is because letters that start with a mem take the shurek vav instead of the vav with the shva. And then veshalach, again, remember this, umatzah, vekesef, and actually I got a couple of them wrong. It's actually vachalom. So when you see that the first letter has the shva with the patach, it takes the same vowel as this. So this would actually be ve'emet. So, and this would be vachalom. This would be ve'chali. Vachali, because it's a shva with the kamets. So this would also be a vav with the kamets. One thing that I should point out is in the case of a word that begins with a consonant with just the shva underneath, Shmuel, for example, it will also be shurek vav. So ushmuel. Yeah, also uven. So these two, the bet, the mem, and then the shva, all take the shurek vav. So be sure to review those rules. They are in chapter 4 of your textbook. Now let's do some translation work, okay? So for most of the early chapters, we'll be translating the Joseph story from the book of Genesis. It's not the complete text of Genesis, but a simplified version. So we have some vocab here. It's very important to learn your vocab because when you look up a text like this, you don't want to be looking up a lexicon all the time. You want to be able to know instantly what word you're looking at. So what we'll do is we'll read verse by verse and then we'll translate as we go along. Yashav Yaakov Biknaan. So Yaakov, Jacob, dwelt in Canaan. Vayosef והאחים שמרו את הצאן ליעקב, ויבוא יוסף אל יעקב בדרך רע על האחים. And Joseph and his brothers, so they guarded the flock for Jacob, or they guarded Jacob's flock. There's a bit of leeway in translating this one. And Joseph went to Jacob, or actually rather, Joseph brought to Jacob a bad word about the brothers. ויעקב אהב את יוסף כי רחל ילדה את יוסף ליעקב. And Jacob loved Joseph because Rachel begat Joseph to Jacob. וירא האחים כי אהב יעקב את יוסף, וישנאו את יוסף ולא אמרו ליוסף לשלום. ויראו, so it's, and the brothers saw, that Jacob loved Joseph, and they hated Joseph, and they did not say to Joseph, peace, or they did not wish peace upon Joseph, if you want to be more idiomatic in translating this. ויחלום יוסף חלום, ויאמר אל האחים על החלום אשר חלם. So, and Joseph dreamt a dream, and he said to the brothers about the dream which he dreamt. ובחלום קצרו יוסף והאחים בשדה בחברון, והאלומות אשר קצרו האחים קראו לאלומה אשר קצר יוסף. And in the dream, Joseph and the brothers were cutting in the field in Hebron the sheaves which the brothers cut. They cut to the sheaf which Joseph cut. It's a little weird sentence structure there. ויאמרו האחים לא ימשול יוסף, וישנאו את יוסף עוד על החלום. Actually, I just realized I got one of the words here wrong. So this is actually not cut. This is to bow down. So the sheaves which the brothers cut bowed towards the sheaf which Joseph cut here. Anyway, the next verse. ויאמרו האחים לא ימשול יוסף, וישנאו את יוסף עוד על החלום. And the brothers said, Joseph will not rule, and they hated Joseph more because of the dream. Note that al is translated a bunch of different ways depending on context. Now we're in verse 9. ויחלום עוד ויאמר אל האחים על החלום חלום ויאמר כי בחלום השמש והירח ו11 כוכבים קראו ליוסף. And he dreamt again, and he said to the brothers about the dream. And he said, because in the dream, the sun and the moon and 11 stars bowed down to Joseph. ויאמר אל יעקב על החלום, ויגער יעקב את יוסף, ויאמר היעקב ורחל והאחים יקראו ליוסף. And Jacob said, and he said, to Jacob about the dream. And Jacob rebuked Joseph. And he said, will Jacob and Rachel and the brothers bow down to Joseph? וישנאו האחים את יוסף ויעקב שמר את הדבר. And the brothers hated Joseph. And Jacob kept the word. So note something. The word shamar can sometimes mean guarded, sometimes it means kept. So we ran into this word a couple times. We ran into in verse 2 where it was translated as guarded, but here in verse 11, shamar is translated as kept. Also, you may have noticed several times now that the verb often comes before the noun, that is the subject of the verb. So this is a common Hebrew sentence structure. So it's verb and then subject and then object. והאחים שמרו את הצאן בשכם. And the brothers guarded the flock in Shechem. So something that is worth noting as well is that the original Hebrew form of certain names can be a little different from their English versions. So Shechem in Hebrew is Shechem. So because of the shva there, it turns into an E sound when it gets translated into other languages. Vayomer Yaakov el Yosef, Halo ha'achim bishchem? And Jacob said to Joseph, are not the brothers in Shechem? So something to note here. The ha at the beginning can sometimes also be an indicator of a question that is answered with a yes or no. Like, is it the case that the brothers are in Shechem? You may also note that lo in this particular instance is spelled with a cholem vav. Normally it's just spelled with a lamed and an aleph, but sometimes a cholem vav is also inserted there. So there are two variant spellings of the same word. You'll more often see it without this, but sometimes you'll see it. Vaishlach Yaakov et Yosef min Chevron למען ישאל יוסף על האחים ועל הצאן ושלח דבר אל יעקב וילך אל שכם. And Jacob sent, ignore that. Jacob sent Joseph from Hebron on account of in order to, or so that, he may ask, or Joseph may ask, about the brothers and about the flock. And he sent word to Jacob, and he went to Shechem, Vayimtza'u ish el Yosef besadeh bishchem. And he found a man, and a man found Joseph in a field in Shechem. So sometimes it can be slightly confusing. What is the subject? What is the object? You'll notice that the easiest way to determine the object of a verb is that it has et before it. We'll actually talk about that later. It's one of the rules that you'll need to learn. Vaish al Yosef et haish al ha'achim. And Joseph asked the man about the brothers. Vayomer haish ki halchu ha'achim el dotan. Vayelech Yosef. Vayimtza et ha'achim b'dotan. And the man said, for they went, the brothers went, to Dotan. And Joseph went, so Joseph walked, and he found the brothers in Dotan. So that will give you a very basic primer on how to translate texts. So if you were able to follow along and you were able to understand each word, good job. So it gets a little more complicated from here, but at least you know what it's like to translate a chunk of text from Hebrew into English. So the word ki, it comes up a few times. So there are a number of variant translations of it. It can sometimes mean that. It can sometimes mean because. It can sometimes mean for. And which one it means in any given context, you just have to look at the surrounding context to see which one fits best. So now we'll get to some grammar. So we'll try to cover chapters 5 and 6 in the textbook. So chapter 5 is about vowel changes in Hebrew nouns, and then chapter 6 is about nouns and adjectives. Chapter 5 is a little bit on the theoretical side, and it can be very technical at times, but it is something that is worth knowing about. It has to do with why nouns are voweled the way they are in various forms, and it can be a little daunting to see all these rules at first. And the good news is that it's one of those things that you sort of learn by induction. I mentioned that this is one of the better ways to learn Hebrew is you see a whole bunch of examples and you learn to infer what the rules are about them. And this does have some practical use for differentiating certain similar words. So it's good to know about them. And also, for those of you who want to become like Bible nerds and learn Hebrew at an advanced level, this will actually come up a lot more in advanced Hebrew. So for basic Hebrew, I'll try to run it through it very quickly. Historic vowels has to do with how these nouns were voweled in the earliest phase of the Hebrew language. And this is admittedly a little bit on the speculative side because as most of you are aware, vowel markers were not added to the Hebrew language until about 1300 to 1400 years ago when the Masoretes produced the Masoretic text. They introduced the vowel system that we are familiar with today. Before that, Hebrew texts were unvoweled, So you had to infer what the vowels were. But when they voweled the text, they chose to uh, create add certain vocalizations patterns to words. For example, here's your basic masculine singular verb, chacham, which means um, wise man. Note something in the plural form, chachamim. The vowels are a little bit different. So in the singular form, you have two kametzes underneath the chet and the kaf. On the plural form, though, you'll notice that the first letter, the chet, instead of a kametz, it has a patach with a sigol. Sorry, patach with a shva. And then you have a chirek underneath the mem here. It gets more complicated when we see the construct forms of these. So a chacham of something will have two patachs, and then there's the patach shva, and then chochme, which is like the wise men of something. You have patach, and then a shva, and then you have a tsere before the yod. And there are some rules governing why they become this way. But first, we need to talk about historic vowels. So there are two basic historic vowels: historic long and historic short vowels. Um, a historic long vowel. Sorry, I lost my place. A historic long vowel is a vowel that, in its historic form, has always been long. A historic short vowel is one that was long, but depending on the conjugation of the word, it becomes either reduced or it becomes lengthened. So when it becomes lengthened, it becomes a long vowel. A long vowel in this context being a kametz, a tsere, or a cholem. Reduced would be basically a shva or a shva with one of these vowels. And to know when a historic short vowel lengthens or shortens, there are some rules that you need to learn. So here are the three basic rules of vowel change. Closed unaccented syllables require short vowels. So that is a syllable where there are two consonants in there. And near open syllables, one syllable before the accent, you lengthen for nouns and you reduce for verbs, but you lengthen A-class vowels. And then distant open syllables, you reduce. So I told you this would be on the technical side, and even me, I have trouble remembering these rules at times. Fortunately, even if you don't memorize the rules off the top of your head, you sort of instinctively know them. The more you get exposed to Hebrew, it's kind of like English grammar. Like if I asked you to name all of the various rules of English grammar, you probably wouldn't be able to name them off the top of your head, but you sort of intuitively know them because you're using English all the time. For example, forget, I'm not going to make examples. So let's look at the word chacham, okay? So in its historic form, you will have chacham with two patachs, but you will never see the word chacham in two patachs because it will always change into one of four different permutations. So here is the table that shows you how they change. So a singular form, chacham, will both patachs turn into a kametz, okay? And this is because the accented syllable, because this rule 1 states that a closed, accented syllables should always have a long vowel, and then this is the near syllable, near open syllable to it. It has to lengthen. Unless if this was a verb, it would shorten. That's another thing. Now, chacham and then something Now, this is assuming there's another word here, and then those two words get considered as one compound word for purposes of this grammar. So there's an accent on the word that's here. Um, so you have a closed, unaccented syllable, which, according to Rule 1, um, takes a short vowel, so patach, and then the distant one, and then a distant um, open syllable, which is two syllables away from the accent, will be reduced. So you get a patach with a shva. Now, here's where it gets fun. So, chochme something. Let's say wise man of a father. Chochme av. Okay, I just randomly inserted a word there. So, the near syllable, it's always, well, this is always a seriod in plural forms, plural construct forms. Now, the first distant open syllable, it reduces to eshva, and then this, it reduces to a pat, and then this just becomes a patach. And then chachamim, wise men. So this is the closed accented syllable, the kaf, which is the near syllable. It's an open one, so it lengthens. The one after it, the distant one, it shortens. So epatach with a shva. Chachamim, chochme something, chacham something, and then chacham. So don't worry too much about this for now. The only thing that I want you to know at this moment is that when the vowels underneath the nouns change, it's not random. It is governed by certain set rules, and that over time you learn to instinctively learn these rules. And this will seldom come into play in your reading of Hebrew. The main reason you may want to learn this at a practical level is that actually certain words are differentiated by them. So, for example, let me see. There's actually one example that's given in this textbook. It's the difference between chokhmah, which is the word for wisdom, and then chachama, which is the word for wise woman. So let me see. There we go. You must eventually be able to distinguish between the adjective wise woman and the noun wisdom, and the verb she was wise. So knowing the technical rules behind vowel changes will help you to differentiate these three seemingly identical words that have the same consonants, but they're not actually identical because they have different vowel markers. How are they differentiated? Well, you have to know the vowel change rules. So, but a lot of times you can also know this from context. But it's good to know that this is something that this is something that will come up in your reading of Hebrew. One last thing. So there is a section here on special considerations for Cigalate nouns. A Cigalate noun is one which has it has a certain form, such as Sefer and Melech. It's called Cigalate because you can see the last syllable has a segel in it. Also, we mentioned that usually noun this accent is on the last syllable. In Cigalate nouns, it's on the second to last syllable. It's Melech and Sefer and then Boker. So here's the interesting thing about Cigalate nouns is that in their historic forms, this would have been a shva. So the historic form of melech or king is malk. And because Hebrew doesn't like consonant clusters, malk becomes so the shva here turns into a segol, so this becomes malek. And then the patach here lengthens. When it lengthens, it becomes a segol. So malk becomes malek, becomes melek. So the word for book, its historic form is sifr, which becomes sifer, which becomes sefer. The word for morning is boker, which becomes buker, which becomes boker. So this is just one of those fun facts that is worth noting. Why are certain nouns the way they are? And also why, when they become plural, they seem to take completely different vowels. So melech in plural is malachim, and sefer in plural becomes sefarim. Boker in plural becomes bekarim. And there are some rules governing those changes. Once again, don't worry about them for now. I'm just letting you know those rules exist. If you have the textbook, you can memorize them in your own time, but I'm not expecting you to. In fact, when I was learning first year Hebrew, I didn't have to memorize these rules myself. I don't even think there was a dedicated chapter just explaining them. When I took first year Hebrew, I used Homestead and Cook's grammar, which was fairly basic. So these rules may have been mentioned in passing, but we didn't dwell on them. And because we didn't dwell on them in my first year Hebrew, I don't expect you guys to have to dwell on them either. On the other hand, we were forced to dwell on these rules in advanced Hebrew. So if you ever want to learn Hebrew at advanced level, do make note of these rules. Having covered those vowel changes really quickly, let's get to nouns and adjectives. So you were introduced to nouns and adjectives in chapter 4, but we didn't say a whole lot about them. One of the main things that I want you to note about nouns and adjectives in Hebrew is that they tend to be governed by many of the same grammatical rules. For example, they tend to be conjugated similarly in their plural and feminine forms. Also, Hebrew makes frequent use of substantives. A substantive is an adjective that is functioning as a noun. So one example is HaChodesh Yisrael. Okay, HaChodesh Yisrael literally means the holy of Israel. But holy here isn't just an adjective, it's referring to a concrete noun, in this case God. So HaChodesh Yisrael would more properly be translated as the Holy One of Israel. So you'll run into a lot of that as you read Hebrew. So adjectives in Hebrew are conjugated just like nouns, and as a rule, adjectives must always agree with the number and the gender of the nouns that they are modifying. So, for example, a good year is a Shana Tova. A good boy is a Ben Tov. Now, there are some irregular nouns that are conjugated, like they are one gender, but they're actually another. So, avot. So, you may recall, ot is the feminine plural ending, but avot means fathers. And fathers are obviously masculine, modern gender studies notwithstanding. So avot, even though it has a feminine plural ending, it is still considered a masculine noun. So when we say good fathers, we don't say avot tovot, we say avot tovim. All right? So the endings are not the same, but they are grammatically the same gender. Another example given here, it's Eretz Tova. So Eretz is the Hebrew word for land, ground, or earth. And you'll notice that even it does not have the standard feminine ending, which is the patahe. However, rest assured, this is feminine. So earth in Hebrew is feminine. So when we say a good land, it is Eretz Tova, not Eretz Tov. So just remember that. So it agrees with the gender and the number of the thing that it is modifying. So adjectives can roughly be divided into attributive adjectives and predicate adjectives. So these are the two main uses. And if you want to be nitpicky about it, there are actually three uses, substantive being the third one. But for this grammar is focusing on the first two uses, so we'll talk about that. Attributive adjectives has to do with an adjective that is added directly onto the noun. So when we in English we would say, for example, the good man, the good boy, the good king, the good earth, the bad man, the bad king, the bad earth, right? So bad and good in this context would be an attributive adjective. And one of the easiest ways to identify an attributive adjective in Hebrew is that it agrees with what it is modifying, not just in number and gender, but also in definiteness. So let's look at this. Amar hamelech hatov el ha'ish. So he said, the king, the good one, to the man. Or if we're going to say it in good idiomatic English, the good king said to the man. All right? So this is how an attributive adjective would look. If the noun that it is modifying has a definite article, it will have a definite article as well. If it doesn't have a definite article, it won't have a definite article either. So if we say a good king said to the man, it would be Amar Melech Tov El Haish. So here is a different sentence. Shamaki Hamelech Tov. Okay. So here notice that the word Tov, even though it is modifying the word king, it does not agree with it in definiteness. So Shama, he heard, that, the king, Tov, good, a good one. In good idiomatic English, you would translate this as he heard that the king is good. So the word is, so Hebrew doesn't exactly have a copula. Well, it does, but in many contexts it's not used. So copula would be is, are, was, were. In Hebrew, there we have the word haya, which means was. It gets used in past and future forms, but there is no present tense for is, so you kind of just have to supply it when you're translating. So Shemaki HaMelech Tov would be he heard that the king is good. So the is there is supplied in English for clarity's sake. Now here's a substantive. Kara ha tov. He called to the good one. What is the good here? Well, that is something that would have to be determined from context. So when you're reading a chunk of Hebrew and you see something like this, he called to the good, you look at the context to see, is there another noun there that might be modified by tov. So let's say there's a man there, or there's a king there. So you could translate as he called to the good king. So this act. So here's another example. Adonai Hatzadik ve'ani ami harshaim. So here, note that the Lord, or Adonai, even though it does not have a definite article, it is a proper noun, and proper nouns are naturally definite. They do not need a definite article. So Hatzadik here would be attributive. It is agreeing with Adonai indefiniteness. So the righteous Lord. And I and my people, the bad ones. Actually, here, sorry, I made a mistake here. So I said it was attributive, but it would actually not make a lot of sense to translate this as attributive in context. So actually, let me backtrack a bit. Sometimes it will seem like an attributive, but it would not make sense to translate it as such. So the righteous Lord. So if it was by itself like this, you could translate it as that. However, the context demands that we treat this as a predicate. So it would be the Lord is the righteous one, and I and my people are the wicked ones. And it says so right here. So normally when you see two definite words here, like a definite noun followed by a definite adjective, that would be a sign of an attributive, but sometimes it would not make sense to translate that way, so it would actually be considered a predicative. So one of the things that they want you to learn here is to not just decode, but to actually translate. Like, translate in a way that makes good idiomatic sense in English. So we got some nuances and distinctions here. Our favorite words. So an attributive adjective is closely bound to the noun it modifies and appears in the same syntactical slot in the sentence as the noun itself. Predicate adjectives also reflect an attribute of the noun, but do so from a different grammatical slot in the sentence. So in other words, an attributed adjective is directly connected to the noun and it can't be separated from it, whereas the predicate adjective is in a different slot from it. So like the term implies, it is generally added to the predicate of a sentence. So here's some rules for distinguishing them. Adjectives before the noun tend to be predicate. So tend to be predicate adjectives. So tov melech, a king is good. And then adjectives that do not match definiteness would be a predicate, also be a predicate adjective. Here the example is hamelech tov, the king is good. So otherwise, rely on the context. Note that in Hebrew, adjectives generally, at least attributive adjectives, generally come after the noun that they're modifying. So tov melech. So we would say a good king in English, but in Hebrew it would be more like a king good. This is common in most Semitic languages, and occasionally it comes up in Indo-European languages as well. So, for example, in French does a weird thing where some adjectives come before the noun, some come after the noun. But don't worry about that unless you want to learn French, in which case you will need to worry about that. And then we should also learn about superlative and comparative adjectives. So in English, we would say big, bigger, biggest. or good, better, best. Of course, in English, we don't say gooder and goodest. That would not be grammatically correct, but it's better and best. It's an irregular form. Fortunately, Hebrew is much more regular in how it shows the comparative and the superlative. So you don't add an ending to you don't conjugate the adjective the way we conjugate English adjectives. So there's no and est. However, what we do is we make use of the word min, the standard preposition of from. So here we see David tov min Shaul. Now, if we translate this hyper literally, it would be David is good from Saul. But that obviously doesn't make sense. What this would mean in good idiomatic English is David is gooder than Saul, or better than Saul. So the min here is a min of comparison. It's showing that David is more good in comparison to Saul. Now, the min can also be used is also used in the superlative. So here you see David hatov min ha'anashim. David is the good from the men, if we translate hyper literally, but idiomatically we would say David is the best among the men. So the difference between the comparative and the superlative is that, first of all, there is a definite article on the adjective, so hatov, and then the noun that comes after it is going to be a plural, because obviously you need a group of things to be the superlative in that group. David is the best among men. David hatov min ha'anashim. So make note of this. So superlatives and comparatives are not terribly common in Hebrew, but they do come up quite a few times. So you should learn how to identify them. General rule of thumb, if you see the word min and it doesn't make sense to translate it as from, such as in this context, you might want to look for alternate uses of the word min. And one of the main alternate uses is to indicate a comparative or a superlative, especially if there is an adjective before the word min. Now, let's go to demonstrative pronouns. There's a couple more things in this chapter that we need to cover. And then if we have a little bit of time left, we'll do a bit of another exercise to solidify your knowledge of this. Demonstrative pronouns, if you know your English grammar, it would be this, that, these, those. And we have 4 of them in English. In Hebrew, we have a few more than that, because in Hebrew, we distinguish between masculine and feminine. So a masculine this is ze, a feminine this is zot, and then plural is ele, and then it's the same for both genders. But then for things that are far away, we find something interesting here, okay? That, a singular that is who, a feminine that is he, a plural that is hema or him, and then a feminine those is henna or hen. Notice something. These are also what we would use as the standard personal pronouns in Hebrew. So he, she, they. So these nouns do double duty in Hebrew. They're both the personal and the demonstrative pronouns. And this is one of those funny things about Hebrew. It doesn't distinguish between personal and demonstrative pronouns the same way English would. So sometimes you will see a who, and it might mean he, or it might mean that. How do you know which one it is? Context. Greek does the same thing on occasion as well, but since this is not a Greek course, I'm not gonna elaborate on that. You'll learn it if you decide to learn Biblical Greek. Um, Here are some examples of how these work. So, Hamelech Hazeh, this king. So, the same rules that we use for adjectives also apply to demonstrative pronouns. So, if it agrees in definiteness, it is attributive. So, Hamelech Hazeh is this king. However, if we say Zeh Hamelech, it would be this is the king. Or if we say Hamelech Zeh, same thing. This is the king. Melech Zeh, a king is this, or this is a king. So note the definiteness of the demonstrative. That will be one of your major clues to whether this is predicative or demonstrative. Sorry, predicative or attributive. Um, so actually, this will always so without the definite article, it will always be predicate, because it wouldn't make sense to say this king without the definite article. This is the rule that I just explained. So there. Now, one more thing that we need to cover is the function of Hebrew nouns. So if you've learned Latin or Greek grammar, you may be familiar with terms like nominative, accusative, genitive, and dative. We generally do not use those as often in Hebrew. Some people will use them in the context of Hebrew grammar, but it's not as often used. And one of the major reasons why it's not as often used is because Hebrew doesn't conjugate nouns by case the way Greek and Latin do. So this is one of the things I love about Hebrew grammar. You don't have to worry about conjugating nouns. So none of that business like you would have in Latin, where you have to learn servus, servum, servi, servo, serve, serves, servorum. I don't even remember all of them. In Hebrew, it's just one form. So, eved, which is the word for servant in Hebrew. This is not to say that Hebrew doesn't have rules for how to determine a nominative from an accusative. There are ways to learn them. So a nominative noun would be a noun functioning as the subject of a sentence. So if I say the man eats, so the man is the subject and eats is the verb. And if we say the man eats the bread, bread would be the object or the accusative. And in Hebrew, just as with English, the nominative the subject will come before the object in word order. So Hebrew does rely on word order more than would say Greek or Latin, but less so than with English. Because unlike English, Hebrew does have a way of demonstrating the direct object. More specifically, definite direct objects. So the word et, if you remember in our translation exercises, we ran into the word et a few times. It's sometimes spelled with segal, sometimes with a tere. It doesn't change. It doesn't change really. But et comes before a noun, a definite noun that is functioning as the object. And one of the best examples of this would be the very first verse in Genesis. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. So, in the beginning, God created the heavens, et hashamayim, and the earth, ve'et haaretz. Both the heavens and the earth have et before them to indicate that they are the objects of the verb create here. And of course, Sometimes you will also run into what is called a predicate noun. So in a predicate noun, it's funny because, as I mentioned earlier, Hebrew often lacks a copula, or the word for is or are. So you will see something like Adonai Ha-Elohim. So the Lord is God. So Ha-Elohim in this context is what you call the predicate noun because it is the predicate in this sentence. But there's no verb that is modifying it. On the other hand, you have something like Haya David Melech. So there is a copula here, the word Haya, which means he was. David was king. Melech here is the predicate noun because the predicate noun is basically identifying the subject. So it's the same thing. David is also the king, the Lord is also God, but it's further specifying the nature of that subject. It is not an object in the classic sense. Speaking of objects, you should also note that there is some such thing as the object of a preposition. In English, we call this the indirect object. So I throw a ball to the kid. So to the kid there would be the indirect object. In Hebrew, we would call that the object of the preposition. And as the name implies, you will know that's the object of the preposition because it'll have a preposition such as el or b or l. Note that the preposition here doesn't always indicate that the thing after it is an indirect object. Sometimes the object of a preposition is also a direct object. Here is an example. Shamal David. So you can translate this as he heard David or he listened to David. If we say he heard David, then le David is considered the direct object. But if we say he listened to David, it becomes an indirect object. So that distinction that we use in English grammar, it's a little different in Hebrew. And then a couple more things. You have direct address or the vocative. So the definite article is sometimes used to indicate it, but not always. So Hamelech, so the king, but if it doesn't make sense to say the king in that context, it could mean O king. Definite proper nouns, such as names, will not take a definite article ever. So sometimes it is a vocative, but you would have to know from the context. So Reuben, you are my firstborn. You'll know from the context. One last thing here, restatement or apposition. Apposition is basically a noun that comes after another noun, and the second noun in that series is basically further describing the noun that comes before it. So Sarai Ishto, Sarai, his wife. So his wife here is just modifying Sarai. It's referring to the same thing, but the second noun is further describing the first one. So it could also be used for implied subjects. So Shamar Yosef et Hatson. So he, that is to say, Joseph, kept or guarded the flock rather. And finally, I can have a chain of appositions. So Potiphar, Pharaoh's official, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, purchased Joseph in Genesis 39:1. All of these nouns are referring to the same guy. So you have a series of nouns, and all of the nouns after Potiphar are what we would call appositions. Now, before we finish this session, let's do a little bit of bonus translation. We already did Genesis 1:1-5 before, or we recited it rather. So let's revisit Genesis 1:15. So what we'll do is we will recite one verse at a time, and then we'll identify nouns, verbs, and adjectives. All right. Verse 1. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. So, Bereshit means beginning. That is a noun. We'll use red for nouns. Bara means he created. So that is a verb. We'll use blue for verbs. Elohim is a noun. Et hashamayim is also a noun. So this noun, because it has the definite direct object marker, it is the accusative form. Vet haaretz, another noun. These are the objects of the verb bara, which is performed by the subject Elohim. Verse 2. V'haaretz haita tohu v'vohu v'choshek al panei tehom v'ruach Elohim merachefet al panei hamayim. And the earth was, that's a verb. Tohu, that's an adjective. So that's formless. V'vohu, and void. We'll use green for both. V'choshech, and darkness, another noun. Al panei tehom, so preposition. Panei, faces or the surfaces, another noun. Tehom, it's upon the face of the deep, another noun. Veruach, and the spirit. Elohim, the spirit of the Lord, another noun. Merachefet. Merachefet is a participle form of a verb. Participles come up very late into the grammar, so don't worry about that for now. All you need to know is this is a participle verb. Al panei hamayim. So you got two more nouns here. So here, this noun is the subject of haita, and then choshek is the subject. Well, there's no verb here. It is upon al panei hamayim. So the object of the preposition is panei tehom. Veruach Elohim. So this is one whole thing. Is the subject of this verb merachefet. And then the prepositional object here is al panei hamayim. Now verse 3. Vayomer Elohim, Yahi or, Vayhi or. So note that Hebrew frequently has what we call a VSO form. So that stands for verb, subject, object. So frequently the verb comes first in the sentence before the noun. Actually, that's the case here too. So notice that bara, the verb, comes before Elohim, the subject. Again, Vayomer comes before Elohim, which is the subject of Vayomer. Yahi is an imperative verb. It's like be, or is the object. Vayahi is and was, and then or is light. Verse 4. Vayar Elohim et haor ki tov, vayavdel Elohim ben haor uven hachoshech. Vayar, again, a vaiktol form of a verb. It means to see. And Elohim is the noun. Et haor, this is the noun that is the object of see. And we know that because of this. Et ki tov. So this is a predicate adjective modifying haor. Vayavdel, and he divided. Elohim, the subject of Vayavdel. Ben haor uven hachoshech. So these are prepositions. So haor and hachoshech are both objects of the preposition. And then finally, verse 5. Vayikra Elohim la'or yom v'lechoshek kara layla v'hi erev v'hivocher yom echad. So Vayikra is the verb. It's the vehicle form of kara, means to call. Elohim is the subject. La'or, so object of the preposition, he called it yom. So, and then lachoshech, kara. Again, this is the katal form of to call. He called laila, which is night. Vayehi, that is a verb. Vahi erev, vahi voker, yom echad. So echad is a number. Oops, wrong color. And numbers function as adjectives. So we've got color coded for your convenience, all of the nouns in red, all of the verbs in blue, and all of the adjectives in green. Sorry, did I use green for merachefet? My bad. That's supposed to be blue, not green. There you go. So you can see how each word is used, where its location is in the sentence relative to other words, and how Hebrew sentence structures look like. So take a good look, because the color coding is now gone. And that is it for this session. For the next session, we will be covering Chapter 7, which is construct nouns. Are there any questions regarding the stuff we had just learned today?
Checking to see if there are any. I'm not seeing them, but y'all send them to At Reason and Theology.
I kind of see one.
Here's
I see
one.
one question.
Okay, go ahead and grab it.
Should I use the Pimsleur program to learn modern Hebrew? Admittedly, I am not familiar with the Pimsleur program, so I cannot comment on that one.
Any others? Send them to At Reason and Theology.
Yeah. I'm just curious, to the people hearing, do you find it difficult to follow along, or is it relatively easy? Because I'm doing my best to simplify the rules, but sometimes it is hard to explain without getting technical.
I think you've been doing good, but I'm not seeing any other questions. Best program to learn modern Hebrew.
I just use Duolingo, honestly.
Okay. All right, Duolingo. Heard about that. I haven't used it before.
Duolingo is best for modern languages. So modern Hebrew is one. You can also use it to learn French, Greek, modern Greek, Spanish, German, Arabic. They actually have a few classical languages such as Latin, and then they have conlangs like Esperanto and Klingon. So
oh wow, that's funny. Klingon,
but yeah.
I need to learn classics before I can get to some Klingon.
What, you don't want to learn how to recite the liturgy in Klingon?
No, although I wonder if somebody has actually written the liturgy in Klingon. If somebody has translated it.
I mean, there is a Bible in Klingon, so it's not impossible.
Wow, is there really a Bible in Klingon?
I've run into it once.
Wow, that's interesting. I need to check that out. Anyways,
go
ahead.
That's what happens when you cross a Jesus freak with a Trekkie.
Yeah, I mean, I like Star Trek, but I guess I'm not on that level. So that's on another level that I will never reach. So anyways, I appreciate you doing this, Lewis. We'll do another one in about a month. Thank you for doing it. And everybody, thank y'all for watching. Of course, don't forget to subscribe, check help spread this on your social media, and also check us out, patreon.com/Reason and Theology, if you want to support what we're doing here. All right, we'll see y'all soon. God bless.